Hello students, good morning. In the previous class we have discussed about the wavefront and we have got a brief concept about wavefront. We found that the wavefront are the continuous locus of all the particles of the medium which vibrates in the same phase at an instance. We also found the three types of wavefront: spherical, cylindrical and planar front. Today we are going to discuss about Huygens principle of secondary wavelets. You can write Huygens principle of secondary wavelets. Huygens principle of secondary wavelets. You please note it down. Today's topic, the Huygens principle of secondary wavelets. So what is the Huygens principle of secondary wavelets? We'll come to know. According to Huygens principle of secondary wavelets, that we can write number one, all the particles in the medium, okay, all the particles in the all the particles on the wavefront, all the particles on the wavefront, all the particles in the on the wavefront behave like phase source of disturbance. So this lines you please write down. All the particles on the wavefront behaves like a phase source of disturbance and produces secondary wavefront or wavelets. This is number one. All the particles on the wavefront behaves like phase source of disturbance and produces secondary wavefront or wavelets. This is number one. Number two, you can write all the particles propagates in the same speed in the medium. That means speed of all the particles on the wavefront will be same. Number three, the common tangent on the plane will give the position of new wavefront. These are three most important points you should remember for Huygens principle of secondary wavelets. What are the points? Huygens principle of secondary wavelets. Number one, all the particles on the wavefront behaves like phase source of disturbance and produces secondary wavefront or wavelets. These secondary wavefront are also known as wavelets. Next, all the particles all the particles propagate in the same speed in the media. The common tangent on the plane will give the positions of new wavefront. Now I'll elaborate these 3 points by the help of diagram. You kindly note down this point. So the first point, if you go to analyze that all the particles on the wavefront will behave like a fresh source of disturbance and will produce secondary wavefront or wavelets. So how it is possible? So if we consider this is the point source, and we all know that for point source the wavefront produces always spherical. So if I consider that this is a spherical wavefront has been produced due to this point source. Now in this this is a wavefront, spherical wavefront. Now in this wavefront there will also be so many particles. That means in this wavefront, suppose these are the particles. Suppose this is P1 particle. This is particle P2. This is particle P3. This is particle P4, like that. These are particle P5. That means these are some particles of the preliminary wavefront. This is called the preliminary wavefront, or yes, this is preliminary wavefront for this particular point source. Now what is the first point we found in case of Huygens principle of secondary wavelet is that all the particles on the wavelengths behaves like a fresh source of disturbance. Now these particles will also behave like fresh source of disturbance. That means this point will also going to produce some spherical wavefront like that. This point is also going to produce some spherical wavefront like that. This is also going to produce some spherical wavefront like that. Am I clear? Similarly, this point will also produce spherical wavefront, and this point will also produce spherical wavefront. Better not to keep them intersecting. Have you understood now? Fresh source means what? Fresh source means they will produce another wavefront. This was the point for which this wavefront was produced. Now, all these particles of the new wavefront will again behave like a fresh source. That means this point will behave like a fresh source and will produce one wavefront. This point will behave like a fresh source, will again produce another wavefront. Similarly, all of them will also behave like a fresh source of disturbance and produce wavefront at the same time. Now, this is the first point I have told you, that all the particles on the wavefront behave like a fresh source of disturbance and will produce secondary wavelets, a secondary wavefront or wavelets. Now they are going to produce some next wavefront, another wavefront, and this wavefront will be known as secondary wavefront or will be known as wavelet. Now, number 2 point, the speed of the particles in the medium are same. That means speed of this particle from here to here is same. That means the time this particle will take to reach here will be same with this particular point. Will be same with this particular point. Will be same with this particular point. Are you getting my point? That means the time taken by the speed of the particles in the system are quite same. What does it mean? Suppose this is the particles, it must have traveled this much of distance to create this wavefront. Am I clear? That means the time taken, the speed of this particle to go from this point to this point is quite similar with the speed of this particle taken to arrive in this point from this point. That means speed of these particles are same in this medium. Next, third point is very important, that how can we come to know about the positions of new wavefront, since new wavefront will be produced according to the Huygens principle. Now where we can find, or how we can find the new positions of the next wavefront, that is by tangent. So if I make a tangent in here and I join them by the help of a tangent, okay, suppose this is the tangent I have drawn. Now this tangent will give us, this is the tangent. This tangent that is been drawn in the plane of this wavefront will give us the positions of new wavefront, okay, and this wavefront will be known as secondary wavefront. Secondary wavefront, or it is also known as wavelets, remember, okay. So like that we can find the positions of new wavefront, okay. Again same process will continue. Now this point will also produce again some wavefront, this will produce again wavefront, this will produce wavefront, like that it will keep producing. It is an endless process. Is that clear? So this was all about Huygens principle of secondary wavelength. The first is, again I am explaining it, just please remember. First is that all the particles on the wavefront behave like a fresh source of disturbance and produces secondary wavefront or wavelets, like that, okay. So this is producing some wavefront. Number 2, speed of the particles are same in the medium. Speed will be similar. Speed of these all particles are similar in the medium. The third point, that is the positions of new wavefront. Positions of new wavefront will be given or will be found, can be found by the tangent drawn on the plane, and this tangent will give us the positions of new wavefront, okay. If we take one more example of it, if you consider one more example of it here, if you consider, suppose if you go for a linear source, of it, suppose it's a linear source, as you can see these are some particles. Suppose this is P1, this is P2, this is P3, and like that this is your P4. These are the particles, and they are producing some, they will behave now as fresh source, and they are producing a wavefront, like that. These are wavefront, am I clear? So they are producing some wavefront of own, since they are behaving as fresh source of disturbance. Now if I give a tangent in this case also, then I can find this is the secondary wavefront, or this is wavelets or not, like that. This is again, if you see in the next phase, again they will behave like fresh source, and again this process will continue, okay. So like that we can find the positions of new wavefront, and this is in case of linear source, hence it is for cylindrical wavefront. And this was all about Huygens principle of secondary wavelengths. I hope you have understood. Please practice it. In the next classes we'll go to prove the reflection and refraction law of light by the help of Huygens principle.